This is a tape where my great uncle interviewed my great grandpa.
And it's the 19th of June, 1984. And I'm here with my grandpa, Albert Helmbold.
Yeah.
And today I'd like to talk to my grandpa about his life. And I'd like to start all the way back at the beginning when he was born in Germany.
Yeah.
Now, Grandpa, tell us when you were born and tell us a little bit about your childhood.
No, I'm Albert Helmbold, and I was born April 20th, 1905, in Langensalza, Germany. The building I was born in used to be a monastery, and it's over 600 years old. It was remodeled to a four-family building, and in this building I was born. My father, Günther Helmbold, he was a wagon builder, and he worked very hard all his life, and he kept to himself mostly, because he had plenty work to do at home and for the family. Besides his work, we had some farmland where we planted potatoes and wheat, and that was all done in after work hours. My mother even helped by doing sewing, like she got every week a basketful of clothing which she had to sew together, like shirts or work pants or something, and she made some extra money. I had two brothers. The oldest one was Hugo. He was 11 years older than I am, and my brother Otto was 9 years older than I am. So we were a happy family, and finally when I was about 4 years old, we moved to a different address. That was a new six-family building on the outskirts of Langensalza. There we had large fields in back of the building where we seen all these farmers do their work, planting barley, wheat, rye, and oats and potatoes. And we were really before 1914, we lived very happily all along. In 1912, my brother Hugo joined the army, and he was stationed in his hometown. And my brother Otto, he learned the cabinet maker trade. My brother Hugo was a barber by trade. But anyhow, 1914 things changed because of the First World War. My brother Hugo had to go the first week in August with his regiment to France. And I was about 9 years old then, and I remember how they got loaded in by train in big railroad cars, like 6 horses and 6 men, and it was a big freight train which took each section of that regiment to France. My brother Otto, he was working in Bremen and got drafted in about 1916, and he somehow was lucky not to have to go to the front, but he was stationed in Warsaw, Poland, as a with a repair crew for the railroads. And both of them came home again in 1918, you could say, without a scratch. Now, my childhood, I remember, maybe I was 4 years old, how I used to play with other boys and girls, and mostly digging in sand piles, you know. And my color was in the summertime brown. They always said I almost looked like a Negro, you know, because I was mostly outside. But then when I was 6 years old, I had to go to school. But before that, when we took walks and friends of our family would come and say, now, who is that little boy, you know, and what's he going to do someday? Then my mom would always talk to me first. She would say, oh, when he grows up, he's going to go far away from home. She used to call that fremde, that means away from home. And then the people all would laugh and smile, and they knew I wouldn't do that because I was a mama's boy. I liked my mom too much, you know. But the time came when in school, and we started to read and write, and finally, when I was about 8.5 years old, there was a neighbor, a retired traveling salesman, and he had a liking to me, and he called me over his home one day, and he said, Albert, you like to read about the United States. And so I read stories about Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, mostly about Lincoln, President Lincoln, and later then about the prairies out west and the Indians and so on. And it all built up in my mind that I wanted to go and see the United States. So when I was 13 years old, the World War I came to an end. And my brothers came home and they asked me, what kind of work you want to do? I told them I want to be a soldier. He said, oh no, stay away from the army. That's no good, you know. So finally I learned the cabinet maker and building trade. So I had to learn my trade for 3 years and 3 months. And then I got my papers, and I stayed with my boss for another half year. Finally, he had to take in a different apprentice boy, and he told me to look for a different job. So I found one in Mühlhausen, Germany. I worked there for about 7-8 months, and finally that job was done. So I went up to near Bremen to a place called Lunzen by Tittinghausen, near Bremen. And I found a nice job there, and I could live in the building. I get my meals, and I got about 15 marks a week wages. But I stayed up there for 4 years, and still my mind was going to the United States. My cousin Carl Kressel and we dug up some old letters, and there was a sister of my grandfather from mother's side. Her name was Caroline Kressel, and she came to the United States in about 1860. And she rode back and forth for quite a while, but it all stopped somewhere around 1900. But these old letters, we wrote to that address, and we got an answer that aunt was still living. And we asked them for an affidavit that we could go to this country. So Carl Kressel my cousin, he got the first affidavit in 1926. He was a barber by trade, and he came over here, and he liked it very much, but he had other ideas. He wanted to be in New York, so he left. In the meantime, I got my affidavit that I could come to the United States. So on 15th of March, about 15th of March 1927, I got notice to go to the American consul in Bremen to be examined. And I was lucky enough to be accepted. The same day I went to the North German Lloyd to get my tickets, boat trip, for the boat ride to the United States. So I went back to Tettinghausen because my brother, Hugo, had a barber business there. And I told him that I was accepted, but I needed some money. So he said, by the way, I give you 600 marks. So finally, I needed another 600, for my tickets and little things. And I wrote my mom, and she said, she talked it over with Dad, and Dad said, if you got the money, give it to her. So I bought my tickets on May 3rd, 1927. I left Germany on an old wooden ship called Derflinger. It was only 9,000 tons. And he came to the United States over Halifax to New York. It was a 13-day trip. I got very seasick, but the last 2 days I felt very good. So when we arrived in New York, we got examined again, questioned different ways, and somebody took us to the train to take a ride to Cincinnati. When we arrived in Cincinnati the next morning, I saw a telephone booth, so I looked up the telephone number of my relatives, because that Aunt Caroline and her son Otto and daughter Emma, they had a telephone and they lived in Clifton Heights. So I found their number, and some lady did a calling, and within an hour they were all down at a depot and picked us up, and we went to their home. Oh, they were very nice people, and they treated me swell. So the next morning, Emma said she was going downtown and I should go along and look for a job. So I went along, but in Germany I had talked to a man who used to work in Cincinnati for a couple of years. And he gave me an address along for the Mitchell Furniture Factory on John Street near Central Avenue. So she showed me the way, and I went down there, and I asked for a job, and they remembered that man, but they couldn't take anybody just then, because they had to lay off quite a few men the same day. So when I left there, I came up Central Avenue, and of course everything was strange, but I saw a bookstore. And I thought I'd buy myself a city map. So I go in that bookstore and asked for a city map. And they came out, it was 35 cents it cost. And they asked me where I wanted to go to, and they looked it all up and showed me Central Avenue and so on. And then I kept on going. And after a short while, I came to some show windows, and there were some wooden store fixtures on display. And I thought to myself, no, I can make that. That's right in my line, And I went in the office and I talked German because English I didn't understand. So they called somebody and they asked me if I could do something like this. I said yes. They told me to come back the next morning and start to work. So they told me to bring my tools along, but in Germany we didn't need the tools because the boss would furnish them. I told them, but they told me to come anyhow. So we started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I had to help somebody, and about 9 o'clock the foreman said, "No, Al, you need some tools." So we made out a list, and by 11 o'clock I had my toolbox and the tools I needed. And when they brought them, I told that officeman I wanted to pay right away, $18 and some cents. He said, "Oh, you can wait till your." I says, "No, I paid because I had $28 in my pocket. That's all I had when I arrived in Cincinnati." So I paid it, and that made quite a good showing there. And I kept on working, and the first payday came around, and I got paid for 2 days. And the foreman came up, he says, "Al," he says, "we paid you 45 cents an hour, but next week you get more because you can do the work." So I kept on, and I stayed with the company about 7 years. I worked for them. But then, the first Sunday, my cousin Emma, she says, "Now today you have to go to Sunday school." I didn't really felt like going, but she demanded it. I had to go along, So I went along, and in that Sunday school I met quite a few men. Some talked German, some just a little bit. And there was one particular man, he was a photographer. His name was Reimann, and he had his business on Central Avenue in Mohawk. And he asked me in German what I was doing and where I work and all that. And he said I should go to night school. And there's a night school right close to his business. And his business and where my workplace was close by, just about a block away. So you come over the next night, he says, and I'll take you over to the school. So the next Monday night, after quitting time, I went over to see that Mr. Reimann, and he took me right next door. That used to be the American House. That was a house where immigrants go at night to school. So he introduced me to the ladies and to the principal, and they told me to come back the same night. So I went home. I used to walk to work and from work home. Up Ravine Street, Warner Avenue, Moorline to Lion Street. That's where I lived. So after I cleaned up and had my supper, I went to night school. And everybody, their teachers and principals, they only spoke English. But they made us feel right at home there. They gave us pencils and papers and books to read, and we didn't even have to pay a cent for anything. So I went there 4 nights a week, always 2.5 hour a night, and picked up a little language, a few words here and there. And but at home, Emma and Otto and that aunt, they only wanted to talk German. So it made it pretty hard for me to learn English. But it took me about 7 months till about around Christmas before I really could say a few words and talk about something. But I kept on going, and I wouldn't miss a night. I always had to be there. So I liked Cincinnati right away. The people were nice. The neighborhood was nice parks, streetcar connection, any distance. On Sundays, I used to buy Sunday pass for 25 cents. I could ride the streetcars from 5 in the morning till 1 o'clock at midnight. And I got to know the city very well, all over. then I met a German fellow, and he and I, we would go out Sundays, go swimming in the Little Miami near Marymount, and one day we saw some folding boats coming on the Little Miami, and these were German people. They had what they called the clubber boat kayaks. So we decided we buy one. And so my buddy, Willie Helmbold, and I, we bought one of those boats, and then for about 3 years we went out Saturdays, Sundays on the river, high water, low water, ice or snow, and we went boat riding and traveled. The nicest thing about it was we could transport that boat on the streetcars. It folded up in 4 packages, and we went downtown from the streetcar to Front Street and Broadway, opened our bundles, assembled it, and off we went. And then came home. Maybe we went to Lawrenceburg, Indiana. We came home on the traction car, all folded up, and back. And then we met a fellow on the Big Miami River. He had a camp. Mr. Motor, he was retired. And when he met us, and we thought we'd just stop in there for a minute, he wouldn't let us go. He says, "You boys come back every weekend." Because, he wanted to paint that here and repair the roof. And then we got stuck there. We had to go there every weekend, but we could ride our boat on the Big Miami and so on. So in there, that's where I met Elfriede. That was in about 1929. And we had happy days down there, many good friends. And in 1932, work got kind of slack in the winter time, so I decided to go back home once and see the folks. When I told Elfriede I wanted to go to Germany, she said she wanted to go along. And so we got married on December the 12th, 1932. And we went on our honeymoon by boat on the Berengaria. It was a big ship, about 60,000 tons. And we went to France, Paris, and from there to Germany. And we spent 4 months on our honeymoon. And we came back over Holland, England, and came back on the Aquitania. That was a big ship too, to the United States. And right away, I had my job back and kept on working. And we used to live on 114 West Macmillan. It was the highest building on the street. And we could overlook the city and saw the Kentucky hills. And we lived there till 1937. Then Kramer and Billy, they went to Germany in 1937. And at that time, we bought our first house on 2925 Bellevue Avenue. That's in Mount Auburn. And our 2 children, Donald was born at Bethesda Hospital, May 7th, 1938. And then Charlotte was born 4 years later, May 30, 1942. And the children grew up and had a good time there in a very nice neighborhood. But then that house got too small. So we decided to move to Westwood. We bought a house there. It was an old house, but we fixed it up real nice. And the children were amongst good people, and we were very happy there. So in 1940, when the war started, the Second World War, I always had told my parents and my friends in Germany I would come back after 5 years, to see them again. But when the children arrived and work was scarce, and then the war started, so we stayed right here. I worked very hard during the war, and in 1947 I started my own business, building homes and apartment buildings, and I was fortunate that I could do all that work, hire people and satisfy people, gave them what they wanted, and everything turned out pretty good. Grandpa died in about 1960 in December, and Grandma lived with us 6.5 years on Statham Avenue. She broke her hip, and after that it was too much work to take care of her because Elfrida didn't feel so good either. So she stayed in a rest home a couple of years, and she died in August 1968. And I had retired from my work January 1st, 1968. We went out to buy a Volkswagen Campmobile. So Elfrida and I, we used to go camping. We saw Arizona, Colorado, Florida, and others, always about 8 weeks at a time. It was a happy time. But Elfrida got sick, and finally she had cancer. She passed away May 4th, 1970. So, but before she died, we talked things over, and she said once, that the time comes near that she has to go, but if I ever want to get married, I should marry Gertrude, because she was a good friend of ours since 1927. She always came and saw the children and brought them presents, Christmas and birthdays, and we celebrated. So after a couple of months, we came together once with Gertrude, and we talked about things, and finally a year later, on June the 6th, 1971, Gertrude and I got married. And the nicest thing what happened was that my children accepted her as a grandma, and everything turned out so beautifully, and we are really glad we are together. So now we have grandchildren, 4 boys and 2 girls, and I think we are a real happy family, and let's hope it stays that way. That should be enough.